This is The Right Approach. We are your hosts. I am JW Judge, and with me is Barbara Hinske. This is a podcast for writers to learn more about the craft of writing as we explore a new topic every week. Our guest today is Linden Gross. She is the writing coach for co-host Barbara Hinske, and rather than me tell you about her, we've decided we're going to have her tell you about herself and introduce what we're going to talk about today is what a writing coach does, how you use a writing coach, how that differs from what an editor does. And so the natural jumping off point here is, Linden, welcome to the podcast, and tell us how you got into being a writing coach.
Thank you so much. I didn't plan to be a writing coach, but everything worked out to where it was sort of the perfect answer. I actually started out wanting to be a teacher. And when that didn't work out, I ended up at the Ladies' Home Journal as an associate editor very quickly. And so spent some time in journalism, was at the LA Times Magazine after I decided to leave New York, and then moved on to writing books. I had written the first book ever written about the stalking of ordinary people, and wound up helping people, a lot of people, ghostwrite or just write their books. So I either wrote as a ghostwriter, I either worked as a ghostwriter or a collaborator. The only real difference being whether my name was on the cover or not. And the first ghostwritten book that I did was called The Legacy of Luna. It was about the young woman, Julia Butterfly Hill, who climbed the redwood in Humboldt County, California, to keep it from being cut down, and lived up there for more than 2 years. And I was brought on to the project. It was turned around in 10 weeks because of publisher deadlines. So that was fun. And it became a #1 national bestseller, a New York Times bestseller. So I went on to help other people write books, was still doing a little bit of journalism and freelancing, which I had done for quite a while. And basically, I got an email from somebody who needed a help with a book proposal. And we ended up working together. And then that person happened to be a literary agent, and her colleague had a client who was having trouble producing a book. And so that led to client #2. And then that client was part of a writing group. And that led to client #3. And and this was 25 at least years ago. And I suddenly looked around and thought, I think I have a new branch of my career going here. So that's how I became a writing coach.
And so talk about this book. I hope it's showing on the screen. I don't know if it is. But I do want you to mention this because I'm very proud of you for this.
Oh, thank you.
You are a beautiful writer, and anybody on this podcast should sign up for Linden's newsletter because it's just wonderful. Anyway,
thank you.
But talk about this guy.
So Busting the Brass Ceiling came about. I helped. There was I moved to Bend, Oregon, and there was an elderly woman who was one of the first female cops. She was in that first wave of female cops to be hired by the LAPD. She was, when she first started walking a beat, she did it in heels and a girdle and a skirt, and the purse had to be kept in there. Her gun had to be kept in her purse, and they had to wear lipstick, and it was a different era. And long story short, she's a pretty feisty lady who wound up suing the LAPD for sex discrimination when they did not let women advance past sergeant, which is not very far up the ladder. And they only allowed 8 women to get to the role of sergeant. So it was even further limiting. And so she basically said, somebody has to do this. She had passed the age where she could collect her pension if things got really ugly. And so she ended up suing the LAPD for sex discrimination, and the case became a landmark U.S. Supreme Court, essentially, decision, and changed the ballgame for women on a lot of fronts, not just for
and
women.
she won. She won.
She won. It took 8 years, and there was a lot of recrimination. It was ugly. Yes, she finally won. They lost consistently until it got to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Ninth Circuit ruled in her favor, and it was appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court let the Ninth Circuit decision stand without questioning it. So we had worked together on a manuscript for a long time. She was determined to get it published by a traditional publisher, and we just were not able to sell it. We did a book proposal, and it just didn't sell. I think in part because Fanchon by then was 89, and she was just as feisty as she had been before, and just as stubborn. And so there were certain things she didn't want to hear. So long story short, she ended up passing. And I always felt bad that her story, she's historic, and her story needed to be chronicled. She needed her place in history. And finally, I got a call from a researcher who was working, can't remember, maybe out of Los Angeles, doing research on this topic, and said, I can't find Fanchon's book anywhere, because, of course, she had done a ton of media and kept talking about this book that she was publishing, which never had seen the light of day. And I just decided I can't stand this. And so I ended up revising it, getting rid of some of the problem areas, which included Fanchon writing 100 pages about when she had been deployed to Japan in the middle of all of this as an involuntary recall by the US Army. And it just didn't fit the story, of course. And so I ended up revising it and publishing it, self-publishing it. That's what it's called, Busting the Brass Ceiling.
I'm really glad that there are people who tell stories like that, because it's such an important part of history. I mean, even in the last few years, I've come across like books like, I'm trying to make sure I get this title right, but Killers of the Flower Moon, that may not be right, but about this, killing of these people in this Indian tribe in Oklahoma over oil money. And it's told by a journalist who did years of research on it. And you're like, how have we never heard this story before? So stories like the one you're telling is so important to keep track of and get out in the world. So you are clearly an accomplished writer. You're a journalist, you're writing your own stuff, you're ghostwriting, and there are lots of people who are good writers but aren't capable of teaching other people how to do it because they themselves don't really understand their own internal processes. In the same way that not all athletes can be coaches. So are there any skills that you found, or things that you're able to do that others aren't, that help you teach other writers how to do their craft better?
Well, I think I did start out wanting to be a teacher and kind of trained for that. So I think that's part of it. I come from my father was a very prominent journalist and prolific writer. And so from the time I was pretty young, he would explain certain things about writing to me in using some analogies that I still use today. He had wonderful words of wisdom, as in, I can teach anyone to write, I just can't teach them to think. And I've carried that with me as well. But I think for me, the writing coach piece is a two-pronged piece. One is, yes, I call it power up your writing. Let's make it more effective. If you're writing fiction, let's make it more evocative so that the reader is along for the ride, not just being told about it. And that is one of the primary pieces that we tend to work on, because it's very easy to tell a story rather than to show a story. But I think the other piece of it, and this is where Barb and I end up having so much fun, is that to me, the hard part about writing is that it's often very solitary. Yeah. And, I worked as a freelancer for a long time, and I felt like, oh, great. So I have to motivate myself get myself, do the work, console myself when something doesn't sell, celebrate by myself if it does. Like, this is a lot of just me all by myself. And the fun part that Barb and I have, and I think that with fiction especially, the hard part is figuring it out, figuring out the story, figuring out if it works, figuring out your character development, having somebody to kind of say, I don't buy that. I don't buy that character would do that. Or, when you get to a certain point, Barb, we have now worked on, how many Rosemonts is it, Barb? Are we at 9 now? 7, 9?
As of tomorrow, I'm going to start writing number 9. And a week from Tuesday, we're going to be talking about number 9.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
But that also requires, like, oh my gosh, these are the same people in the same town. What do we do now? How do we, where do we take everything now? And that is how Barb and I started out with that series. But it's a lot of brainstorming. I remember I was visiting friends who lived in Northern California, and I was in my funky RV with my dogs, and Barb and I were having a coaching session. And the wife of my very good friend was out watering the flowers. And afterwards she said, I really didn't mean to listen in, and I'm so sorry, but I couldn't help overhearing. And it just sounded like you guys were gossiping. And I said, well, in a sense we are, because we're gossiping about this community and trying to figure out, what's happening and what the motivations are. And it's fun. I think that half the time it just feels like I'm settling in with a really good chum to talk about these people that have come out of Barb's head.
Well, and so I want to talk a little bit about how we started and our process, because it has made me so much more efficient in my production and effective. And yeah, a 9-book series, you have to have new stuff happening and people have to grow. There has to be character growth. It can't just be, I write in fiction. It would be easy to just, like some Hallmark movies, just it's the same thing. You're gonna, or a Harlequin. At certain points in the book you're going to have a certain thing happen. That's not what I want for my book. So it's a little more of a challenge. And when we met, when I had written my first Rosemont, I thought I was getting a line edit, and instead I got a good, honest, but kindly worded developmental edit that says, you need a whole new subplot. You've introduced a mobster and you do nothing with him.
Well, this was, for me, the biggest piece of that was Barb's first Rosemont book, the original, opened with this guy who you very quickly figure out is not a good guy, except it's raining and he has stopped. He stops his car on the side of the road and gets out in the rain to rescue this stray dog, and then takes him to a shelter that he has founded. And so you have this amazing opportunity. You have this really nasty guy who's going to defraud an entire town and hurt a lot of people, who's rescuing dogs to the point where he has his own shelter. And I just thought, what a fantastic character. I love characters that aren't all bad or aren't all good. They're much more interesting. And it went nowhere after that. And I was like, this is a seriously missed opportunity. And amazingly enough, and I think this is your gift, Barb, you felt the book was done. Yeah. And you were willing to realize that, no, it could be much better. And a lot of writers have a hard time with that. When you think you're done, you're like, oh my gosh, thank goodness. Phew, yeah. That's over. And so to be able to go back, and really, we put in a lot of work.
Oh yeah, it was another year, because I was just new. That is one of my strong points, is I will seek good advice and then I will take it. I'm not looking for somebody who always agrees with me. And so this has evolved over the years, and now our process is we work together for a couple of months and we bang out a first draft, and we talk every week now. I'll send you what I've done and you look at it. We have a roadmap. It isn't like I've got an outline of the entire book when I sit down to start writing, because things evolve as you go along. But I have a pretty good idea of the major character arcs I want to develop. And we hash that out in 1 or 2 sessions. And then we start filling in the lines and doing all of that. That has made me so much more efficient. And I mean, now when I'm done with the first draft with you in 8 weeks, I will do
Which is crazy, just saying. That's not usual.
Thank you. Yeah, I work real hard. I work real hard. And then I need to do one read aloud edit, and then I'm ready to send it to line editing. That is so much more efficient.
Well, and when we started, what was fun is obviously you had a full book written, the first one. So the second one, it's like you sort of kept pushing the line back a little bit. You wrote most of it.
Yeah.
And then the third one, you're like, maybe I should talk to Linda a little earlier. And somewhere around, I don't know, 4 or 5, you're like, maybe we should talk before I start writing.
Yeah.
And it's been so much fun. And it's worked obviously very well for you.
And yes, it is just a blast. That is my favorite point, is like this next month and into December when we're going to be working together again, because it's very collaborative, very creative. And I've learned so much from you over the years. I don't have a background. I'm a legal person. I'm like Jeremy, I was a legal writer, you know, grammar and syntax and all that kind of stuff. But the creative writing stuff I had no background in other than as a reader and appreciator. So Linden, you've really helped me learn to tell, not, or to show, not tell, show, not tell. And I mean, now it's a little rare. I still get every single book. You better show this. You're telling me show it, but it isn't every single week.
The other big thing that you have, I think, come so far on, which didn't come as naturally, was the scene setting.
Yes.
Right. Enabling the reader to actually be able to picture where the action was taking place, and using scene setting to set the mood, to set the tone. And that seems to come naturally now. And that was a hurdle.
Oh, it was. You had to beat that into me, and you sent me a couple
in a nice way.
In a nice way. Oh yeah, you've always been very kind with that, in a nice way. But you sent me the thesauruses that the urban setting thesaurus and the rural setting. I've got the whole set. They come out with one every year, and it's always on my Christmas list for my kids to get me. And I read them. They're helpful.
Well, and they also have the emotional component as well. And what it helps you realize is how important all of that is to help set mood, to establish character, and that the way you describe something isn't just and then there's a book here and a wine glass there and a tree over in you choose the details that you want to focus on to again help establish story or mood or so.
And I want to let Jeremy, I want to say one more thing, then I'm going to turn it back to Jeremy. But one other thing, I'm sitting on the corner of my desk is my book number 9, Rosemont number 9 outline that we did with your comments. And this is a comment that I need help on, because I'm a linear thinker. I take one person's story arc and I write it all. Well, no, that's boring. You need to intersperse them. And so as usual, your comments are, so-and-so has been off the page too long. Time to shift from Loretta and Frank, and let's talk about somebody else. So it's so helpful to have other knowledgeable eyes, and someone, obviously you can tell from this interview that you and I just work together beautifully. Yeah. That's a joy. And Jeremy, you work with a coach, don't you? Or someone sort of.
She's become my coach. But so the person I work with, I knew only over the internet. I mean, we still haven't ever met, but I'm part of this community of lawyers who we're in a chat group, and she doesn't practice anymore and reads a ton and used to be a school teacher. So a lot in common there. Because I also used to be a school teacher before I went to law school. And So I started writing my first, well, the first novel that I finished, because there's two that haven't been completed. I don't know if they will be, but whatever. So the first one that I ultimately would finish, I started writing. I wrote several chapters of, but not having put my fiction writing in front of anybody before, I thought that it's not terrible because I think I would recognize that. But I needed somebody to verify it, like, or to tell me, you need to never touch a keyboard again, please. Like, for the good of humanity, don't do that. And so I sent the first few chapters to her, asked her for her, real feedback. And she pointed out to me that one of the people who was a side characters should get a whole lot more screen time because they were the most interesting character.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. And so as soon as she said that, I realized, holy cow, how did I not see that, first of all? And second, this thing is about to take a whole different trajectory.
Right.
And so what has developed out of that is that I'll write I don't know, 8 to 10 chapters, maybe a quarter of the book, and send it to her. And even this week, I sent her like 7 chapters of the book that I'm currently working on, which is totally different than the first three. And she's read half of it to this point, and she's like, I think you found your footing here. There's some early chapters that you can tell you're trying to still feel your way around it. So I sent her these next 7. And I'm like, okay, I think like I've really hit my stride here, but you tell me, because you're going to know. And so, yeah, it has become that kind of relationship, although at the beginning it wasn't. And the 3 books that I've got out so far are such better products because of the feedback that she provided and insights that she provided, things that I didn't see and frankly wasn't capable of seeing.
Yeah. Well, I think that, I have now obviously coached a lot of people on a lot of books. I've also worked with a lot of people on a lot of books. And when I'm in the writer position, a book is a big deal. It's a lot. Yeah. And you have to dive deeply. And it's almost impossible to retain perspective. You get to the point, I get to the point where about 2/3 of the way through the book, I have no idea if I've just written the biggest pile of crap, or whether it's good. I can't tell anymore. I can't, if I've repeated a scene, I don't see it. So I need somebody to be my person. And so I think that that's such a big piece of the writing coach role, is to be that person who is not the friend or the spouse, who's not saying, oh, this is great, who is really involved with the story enough to really understand kind of where things might need to go. And it's subjective, so let's put that right out on the table right away. But I think you're in the trench, but you're not at the bottom of the trench. So you can still see out. You still have you're very invested in the work, and you're very intimately involved with the work, but you're not the one doing it. So you still have that ability to see things that an author who is so deeply enmeshed is just not going to see anymore.
All right. So you mentioned that the feedback is, and the perspective is subjective. So when you approach an author with criticism, like not criticism being ugly, but like you see a problem in the book and something that needs attention. If they respond adversely to that, and how do you all work through a situation where you think something needs attention and the author doesn't?
Well, I think so if somebody already has a written manuscript, a full manuscript, I'll do what I did with Barb, which is I'll offer a written critique. I read the whole book, and then I basically spell out what I think works, what I think doesn't work, what I think needs to be done. If you'll notice, all of those are preceded with the words "I think." It's my opinion. And one of the reasons that I do this is because it's important for people to at least be pretty much on the same page. You don't have to agree about everything, but where the author understands that the writing coach is seeing things sort of the same way, where they go, oh yeah, that's a good point. Oh, that would be great. Man, not so sure about that one, but that one's cool. So that gives them right away a roadmap to whether, an indication of whether they want to work with me or anybody else as a writing coach. I think for Barb and me, when we have had situations where we don't completely see eye to eye, we talk about it. And we basically, she'll say, I'm not so sure that I agree with your point, and I'll explain where I was going with it. And usually what ends up happening, and this for me is the very most fun part about the writing coach process, is we start trading ideas. Yeah. And suddenly her idea starts to morph based on mine that she wasn't quite buying, but then we talk about it and we get another idea, and it's like we're climbing this ladder. Yeah. And pretty soon we get to this idea that's awesome.
Yes.
And there's right. And there's no way either one of us alone would have come up with this. And that is the ultimate super fun part about the collaboration. And that's it's just dynamic, it's creative, it's impossible to get to by yourself. And so I think that's most of the time what happens. For me, there's a lot of dialogue, and I'm never going to say, and ultimately the author is the author. It's their book, not my book. I give my very best opinion, my very best reasoning, and then they do what they need to do.
I should have got permission for this ahead of time, because so let me ask. Bart, I know that in one of your recent novels there was a really climactic scene that came out kind of flat, and y'all worked through it. Are y'all comfortable talking? Barb, are you comfortable talking about that? Okay, because I think it would be really helpful to talk about this specifically and concretely rather than just kind of in the abstract. So, Barb, tell us about the scene that you wrote, and you submitted it just in general terms, however specific you want to get about the book. And then y'all just kind of tell the story of what happened from there.
So it was in my latest Emily book, Over Every Hurdle. And it was a proposal scene. Now, mind you, my own daughter just got proposed to in my own back garden 2 months ago in the most elaborate proposal I've ever seen. I mean, her fiance hired a set design crew from LA who came to Phoenix with a van full of props and set up my backyard. It was crazy. The Bachelor could never. Anyway, so it was just nuts. And it was just, and there was an impromptu surprise engagement party in my house later with all these people hiding in the house, and crazy. So I had all this stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be so good, so good. I'm so proud of this. And I sent it to Linden, and she said, the proposal scene falls flat. And I'm like, what? I was too close to see it, but you know what? We've worked together enough. If she said it fell flat, it fell flat. And it didn't have enough emotion. And I don't, even though I write women's fiction and there's lots of romance in my books, I don't like writing that stuff. I'm all about the murder, the bad guy, the theft, whatever. But yeah.
So Linden, when you get the manuscript, or at least that part of the story, tell us what you saw.
Well, I was just reading along, and Barb she is writing romantic fiction, romance light. We're not thankfully talking about bodice rippers, though that could be fun too. But in most of Barb's books, I will read, let's say, a wedding scene way more than once. And most of the time, I'm teary after even the 5th reading. It's like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. You're tearing up still? That's ridiculous. You've read this thing a million times. And with this proposal scene, I read it. And I was like, it's nice. And then I'm thinking to myself, this is not the reaction you should be having here. The reaction should be that I should be sucked into the story and sucked into the romance. And I just didn't feel any of that. And so I went back and looked, and some of it had been shortened too much. Like it just wasn't written in a way where as a reader, you got transported so that you felt you were being proposed to. And I went back to Barb and said, this is a huge moment in this book. It's not a huge moment in the book. It's a huge moment in the series. And this is not where we shorten things up and do a Reader's Digest version of the action here. This is a leisurely, let's draw it out. Let's make the reader feel like they're participating in this thing. And we talked about a couple of different scenes that I was like, I want to hear this. I want to see this. And what if instead of this happened? And again, we had a great dialogue. Barb saw it right away, when we started chatting, and she was like, okay, I'm going right back to work. I'm gonna redo this thing. And the next time around, it was perfect.
And the wonderful thing about Linden, and I'm sure your coach as well, is you don't just get the little one-liner, this doesn't work. Just like, okay, well, so what might, it's, you need more emotion, you need to draw out this part, so it's like you get a little bit of a roadmap. You get a good roadmap of where you need to put your efforts, which is so helpful. I don't know if either of you watched So You Think You Can Dance or any of those shows where they talk about, well, you need to do this or that. And I'm like, they describe it in a way that means nothing to me. I'm like, you could give me that feedback, or American Idol singing. And I'm like, I would have no idea what to take from that, how to implement whatever that criticism was. That's not what I get. I get something concrete, which even I can understand.
Well, and again, I think that part of it is when we're in the situation where we're talking during a writing coach session, I will have a suggestion, and then we will talk out how that suggestion could translate to a scene or to improving a scene. And so it's not just me dictating or soloing on this. It's a partnership. Right. It's a creative partnership. And again, that makes it fun.
Yeah.
All right. So this is we're doing 2 episodes with Linden. This is the first. I have one more topic that you've touched on briefly here before we move on to what's going to be our second episode. And that is, y'all talked about Barb's process of knowing some of the major plot points that you're going to get to, but you don't have an outline, but you're also not flying in blind. You've got an idea of where you want to go, and then you've got to fill in all the very many blanks. So Linden, I assume that other authors you work with have different process that vary on this entire spectrum. Right. How does that affect, your approach as a writing coach, and the flexibility and malleability that you have to be able to communicate and work with folks in their different processes?
Well, for starters, it's not just the different approaches, it's the different kinds of books. So, I have 2 or 3 clients who are writing novels, and then I have a number of clients who are writing books to promote their business. And then I have a couple of people who are writing serious nonfiction. And then, so part of it is, what kind of book are we working on? Part of it is, it's always about what works for the person I'm working with. So I know what I'm comfortable with as a writer. I know best case scenario, what I'd probably be comfortable with as a writing coach. That actually doesn't matter all that much. It's what is going to work best for the person I'm working with. And so with some people, I have a woman right now who's a college professor. She was a head of her department. who's writing an amazing book about sort of racism in America today and historically. And I had worked with her as an editor on her book and had to literally tear it apart. I had it all over my kitchen table in little pieces. I had printed it out and had to shuffle and reorganize the whole thing. So I know from working with her in that capacity that she needs a serious outline. She can't seat at the pants. She can't be a pantster on this, because that's clearly what she did the first time around. And so we have been working for probably 3 months now for her to solidify her argument. She's taking this manuscript in a very different direction. That's a more current direction and less of a just academic book. And I kind of finally said, I think you're ready to start writing, just last week, because she had there was an argument that made sense, that was coherent, that was a premise that she was arguing, and she has made a good case. Excuse me. And with a nonfiction book, a lot of times it is that piece of, what's your opening argument as the attorney? How are you supporting that? What's the case as you follow through? And what are your closing statements? It's a good analogy, so that you can convince your jury, which is your readership. So with her, she knows that she has this organizational kind of issue. And even in working with the outline, I had her, we're talking a really detailed outline where she had to come up with the first sentence of each chapter, the transition sentence, the arguments in the middle, the substantiating information. So we really know the roadmap of where she's going, because otherwise she takes a detour and starts heading to, Alaska when we're, trying to get to New York. So again, that's what she needs. Is she dying to start writing? Yeah, she's pretty relieved that she can finally start writing this book. But then, and then there are other things that you start seeing. For example, one of the things I noticed in my own work many years ago is we all tend to start from the top. So when we're editing something, when we're looking at our own writing, when we're looking at an outline and working on it, we all start at chapter 1. So by the time you get to the middle of the book, you've now expended your best brain power on the first half. And the second half tends to get short shrift. And I finally had to say, okay, your assignment, and this was a couple of weeks ago, your assignment is to start at chapter 7, because chapters 1 through 6 are pretty tight. And chapters 7 through 11 are looking a lot weaker, because you clearly are getting there when you're more tired. So let's give them the love. And so again, it's sort of what the work demands, what the person requires. Some people don't have outlines at all. The other main novelist who I work with, who's writing a little bit romantic comedy mixed with a little bit of intrigue, so it's very similar to Barb's style, of kind of mystery light meets romance light. He basically starts with an idea, bashes out a whole manuscript, and then starts back at the beginning, and the story morphs and shifts, and that's his process. He has little to no outline and that's what works for him. And so that's what we do. Is that
what I think that's perfect. And I think that's actually a perfect lead in to what will be our second episode about different types of editing and editing processes and all that sort of thing. But so before we leave off here, I want you to tell people where they can find you, if they're interested in the work that you do and have done.
Wonderful. So I have a number of websites, but I have lindengross.com, which is a little tough to spell, so I'll spell it out, but onestopwritingshop.com also gets you to the same place. So it's LIN as in Nancy, D as in David, EN, G as in George, R as in Robert, OSS as in Sam.com, or just onestopwritingshop.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.